Why Trump still terrifies his enemies. They thought they'd beaten him. Twice impeached, criminally indicted, banned from social media, blamed for an insurrection, rejected by voters in 2020. Donald Trump was supposed to be finished. Done. A cautionary tale in American political history. But here's the problem. Trump doesn't stay dead, and his enemies are learning with growing terror that destroying Trump might be impossible. Not because he's invincible, but because every weapon they use against him makes him stronger. Let me show you what I mean. 2021. Trump left the White House in disgrace. His supporters had stormed the Capitol. 5 people were dead. His own vice president refused to speak to him. Republicans were fleeing his brand. Corporate donors were cutting ties. His Twitter account, his most powerful weapon, was permanently suspended. Political analysts declared his career over. Trump is done, they said confidently. The Republican Party will move on. DeSantis is the future. But what nobody expected was that Trump had discovered something more powerful than the presidency. He'd discovered martyrdom. Every attack, every investigation, every charge. It didn't diminish him with his base. It elevated him. Because Trump had successfully convinced millions of Americans that he wasn't just fighting for them. He was suffering for them. They're not after me. They're after you. I'm just in the way. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Because now every prosecutor became a persecutor. Every judge became corrupt. Every investigation became a witch hunt. Trump wasn't being held accountable. He was being crucified. And his supporters responded with religious fervor. March 2023. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg indicted Trump. 34 felony counts. Falsifying business records related to hush money payments. Historic. No former president had ever been criminally charged. Trump's opponents celebrated. Finally, they said, accountability, justice. The walls are closing in. But then something unexpected happened. Trump's poll numbers went up. His fundraising exploded. His grip on the Republican Party tightened. The indictment didn't weaken him. It weaponized him. Nequili memento tudo mudu, because Trump understood what his enemies didn't. In modern America, being attacked by the system is the ultimate credential. Proves you're a threat. Proves you're authentic. It proves you're dangerous to the establishment. And Americans love dangerous. June 2023. Federal indictment. Special counsel Jack Smith. 37 counts related to classified documents. Trump had allegedly hoarded national security secrets at Mar-a-Lago. Showed them to visitors. Refused to return them. Obstructed justice when investigators came calling. The evidence was overwhelming. Photographs of boxes stacked in ballrooms and bathrooms. Audio recordings of Trump admitting he kept classified material. Testimony from his own lawyers. This was it. The case that would finally end him. Trump's response? He turned his mugshot into merchandise. Sold t-shirts, coffee mugs, posters. Never surrender emblazoned across his scowling face. He raised over $7 million in 3 days. His enemies had handed him the greatest campaign ad in political history. August 2023. Georgia. Fulton County. District Attorney Fani Willis. RICO charges. Conspiracy to overturn the 2020 election. 19 co-defendants. Trump's mugshot broadcast globally. The image that was supposed to humiliate him became iconic. Every indictment followed the same pattern. His opponents thought they were applying justice. They were actually applying rocket fuel. Because Trump had trained his supporters to see persecution, not prosecution. Political warfare, not legal accountability. And here's the terrifying part for his enemies. It was working. The Republican primary wasn't even close. Ron DeSantis raised over $100 million. Had a professional organization. A winning record in Florida. The endorsement of major donors. He was supposed to be Trump without the baggage. He got demolished because Republican voters didn't want Trump without the baggage. They wanted the baggage, the chaos, the fight, the middle finger to the establishment. DeSantis tried to out-Trump Trump on policy. But you can't out-Trump Trump on attitude. And attitude was everything. Nikki Haley tried to be the reasonable alternative, the adult in the room, the candidate who could win independents and suburban voters. She lasted longer than the others, but she never had a chance. Because Trump's enemies made a fatal miscalculation. They thought Republican voters wanted to win. They wanted revenge. By March 2024, Trump had clinched the nomination. Despite 91 felony charges across 4 jurisdictions. Despite being found liable for sexual abuse in civil court. Despite owing $500 million in legal judgments. Despite everything. The man his enemies thought they'd destroyed was about to become the Republican nominee. Again. But the terror was just beginning. Because what Trump's enemies were slowly realizing was that they'd created a monster they couldn't kill. Every attack made him stronger with his base. Every prosecution made them more fanatical. Every attempt to hold him accountable made them more convinced the system was rigged. They'd turned Trump into exactly what he'd always claimed to be. A victim of elite persecution. A martyr for the forgotten. A symbol of resistance against a corrupt establishment. And symbols are much harder to destroy than men. The Democratic strategy was collapsing in real time. They'd spent years, hundreds of millions of dollars, countless hours of investigation, multiple impeachments, criminal indictments, and Trump was stronger than ever. Essa deciso tiria consequentias irreversives. Because by making Trump the victim, they'd made themselves the villains. In his supporters' eyes, Democrats weren't defending democracy. They were weaponizing it. Weren't protecting the rule of law. Were perverting it. June 2024. The first debate. Biden versus Trump. What happened that night still haunts Democratic operatives. Biden froze. Lost his train of thought. Stared blankly. Mumbled incomplete sentences. Looked every bit his 81 years. Trump barely had to attack. Just stood there. Let Biden self-destruct. Smiled. The contrast was devastating. Within hours, Democratic panic set in. Biden had to go. But how? He'd won the primary. He was the nominee. You can't just replace him. Can you? They could. They did. In the most unprecedented political maneuver in modern history, Democratic elites forced their own sitting president out of the race. 3 weeks of pressure. Leaks. Public calls to withdraw. Until Biden finally conceded. Kamala Harris inherited the campaign. No primary. No vetting process. No time to build a coalition. Just coronation. The Democratic establishment had rejected their own voters' choice and installed their preferred candidate. Trump couldn't have scripted it better himself. Because now he could run against the system. The rigged system that denied voters their choice. The corrupt elite that picked candidates in backrooms. Everything Trump had been saying for years was validated in one spectacular implosion. They just proved me right, Trump said at his next rally. They don't believe in democracy. They believe in power. And they'll do anything to keep it. His enemies had handed him the narrative. Again. But here's what truly terrifies Trump's opponents. It's not just that their attacks backfire. It's that Trump has fundamentally changed the rules of political survival. He's shown future candidates that shame is optional. That norms are negotiable. That you can survive anything if you refuse to show weakness. The old playbook is dead. Scandal used to end careers. Now it's just noise. Indictments used to force resignations. Now they're fundraising opportunities. Losing elections used to end political futures. Now you just claim fraud and keep fighting. Trump didn't just survive the system's attacks. He made the attacks irrelevant. And that terrifies his enemies because they've realized something horrifying. They have no more weapons. They've impeached him twice. Investigated him for years. Indicted him in 4 jurisdictions. Found him liable in civil court. Banned him from social media. Called him every name. Exposed every scandal. Nothing worked. Nothing stuck. He's still here. Still fighting. Still winning. Mas ok ninguém esperava era that the legal system itself would become his greatest ally. Here's what keeps Democratic strategists awake at night. Trump figured out how to weaponize the justice system against itself. Every trial, every hearing, every court appearance. It's not punishment, it's theater. And Trump is the star. The cameras, the crowds, the drama. He's turned his prosecutions into the greatest reality show in American history. And Americans are watching, obsessively. The Manhattan trial. April through May 2024. 34 counts of falsifying business records. The prosecution's star witness? Michael Cohen, Trump's former fixer, a convicted perjurer, a man who'd admitted to lying under oath, a man motivated by revenge. Trump's lawyers didn't just defend him. They put the entire prosecution on trial. Every inconsistency in Cohen's testimony, every contradiction, every motive to lie. By the end, it wasn't clear who was the defendant. The jury convicted Trump on all counts. His enemies celebrated. Guilty, the headline screamed. Convicted felon, the label they'd been waiting years to apply. Trump raised over $50 million in 24 hours. Because his supporters didn't see a conviction. They saw a frame-up. A corrupt prosecutor in a corrupt city with a corrupt judge and a corrupt jury delivering a predetermined verdict. Every suspicion they'd harbored about the justice system was confirmed. And Trump? He wore that conviction like a badge of honor. They convicted me for you, he told his rallies. Because I fight for you. Because I won't back down. The conviction didn't hurt him. It completed his transformation into martyr. But here's the deeper terror for Trump's enemies. It's not just that he survives their attacks. It's that he's exposed how fragile the entire system is. How dependent on public faith. How vulnerable to someone who simply refuses to respect it. The justice system only works if defendants accept its legitimacy. If they show remorse. If they submit to punishment. Trump does none of those things. He attacks the judges. Demeans the prosecutors. Calls the system rigged. And millions of Americans believe him. He's not just defending himself. He's delegitimizing the entire apparatus of accountability. And that's what truly terrifies the establishment. Because if Trump can survive this, if he can be convicted and still win the presidency, if he can face 91 charges and emerge stronger, then the system has no power. The emperor has no clothes. And everyone can see it now. November 5th, 2024. Election Day. The final verdict. Not from a jury. From the American people. Would they elect a convicted felon? Would they choose a man facing multiple criminal trials? Would they put someone who'd attempted to overturn an election back in power? The answer shocked the world. Yes, Trump won. Decisively. Flipped Georgia. Flipped Arizona. Flipped Pennsylvania. Swept the swing states. Won the popular vote. 78 years old. Facing criminal charges. After 2 impeachments. After January 6th. Donald Trump would be president again. The terror in Democratic circles was palpable. Not just that they'd lost, but how they'd lost. They'd thrown everything at Trump. Literally everything. Every weapon in the arsenal. Every legal strategy. Every political attack. Every media expose. And he'd beaten them all. Because Democrats realized they hadn't just lost an election. They'd lost the ability to hold Trump accountable. Forever. The presidency would shield him from prosecution. The Justice Department would drop federal cases. State cases would be delayed indefinitely. His Supreme Court would protect him. For years. At minimum. For years where Trump could do anything. And there would be no consequences. But the terror goes deeper than that. Because Trump's victory proved something more disturbing. Proved that, in modern America, accountability is optional. If you're shameless enough, if you fight hard enough, if you refuse to concede, you can survive anything. Trump showed every future authoritarian exactly how to do it. Deny, attack, never apologize, turn prosecutions into persecution, make your supporters believe they're the real victims. And suddenly, the entire system of checks and balances becomes irrelevant. This is why Trump still terrifies his enemies. Not because of what he is, but because of what he represents. The death of political accountability. the end of shame, the triumph of will over law. His enemies understand now that they created this. By overreaching, by making every scandal the end of Trump, by crying wolf so many times that when the real wolves came, nobody believed them anymore. The Russia investigation, Mueller report, 3 years, millions of dollars, thousands of hours of testimony. Conclusion, Trump probably obstructed justice. But you can't indict a sitting president. So nothing happened. The first impeachment.
Ukraine.
Abuse of power. Obstruction of Congress. The evidence was clear. Trump had leveraged military aid for personal political benefit. The House impeached. The Senate acquitted. Party over country. The second impeachment. January 6th. Incitement of insurrection. The most serious charge ever leveled against a president. 10 Republicans voted to impeach. 7 voted to convict. Not enough. Trump walked. Each time his enemies thought they'd gotten him. Each time he slipped through. Each time, his supporters became more convinced the system was weaponized against him. And now they've elected him again. Knowing everything, seeing everything, understanding everything. They chose him anyway. That's what terrifies his enemies most. Not Trump himself, but what his survival says about America, about us, about what we're willing to accept.
Essa decisão teria consequências irreversíveis.
Because Trump's return to power isn't just about one man. It's about the precedent, the message, the lesson, that you can attempt to overturn an election, incite violence, hoard classified documents, falsify records, sexually abuse women, defraud investors, and still become president. What does that teach the next generation of politicians? That guardrails are suggestions, that norms are quaint, that consequences are for the weak. Trump has shown that if you're willing to burn everything down rather than admit defeat, you can win. And his enemies understand that they're not just fighting one man. They're fighting an ideology, a movement, a fundamental shift in American political culture, where truth is negotiable, where facts are partisan, where reality itself is contested. January 20th, 2025. Trump's second inauguration. But this time it's different. This time he knows the system, knows its weaknesses, knows how to exploit them. The first Trump administration was chaotic, undisciplined, staff turnover, internal resistance, career officials pushing back, the adults in the room containing him, limiting him. Not anymore. This time Trump's team is disciplined, loyal, ideological. They've spent 4 years planning, building infrastructure,
Vetting personnel.
creating playbooks. Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation, the America First Policy Institute, conservative think tanks preparing for this moment. And what they're planning terrifies Trump's enemies to their core. Because Trump 2.0 isn't about revenge. It's about transformation, permanent, structural transformation of American government. The Department of Justice, Trump's first move, fire the FBI director, again, replace career prosecutors, install loyalists. The DOJ becomes an instrument of presidential will, not an independent institution, a weapon. I am your retribution, Trump promised. He meant it. Federal cases against Trump? Dismissed. Cases against his allies? Dismissed. New investigations? Against his enemies, Biden, Harris, Pelosi, Schiff, everyone who investigated him. Now they're the targets. His enemies watch in horror as the justice system they weaponized, or tried to weaponize against Trump is turned against them. They cry foul, claim abuse of power, demand accountability. Trump's supporters laugh. Where was your concern when it was happening to him? The irony is perfect. The precedent was set. Trump is just following it. The federal bureaucracy. Trump calls it the deep state. Millions of government employees. Many have worked there for decades, loyal to institutions, to norms, to processes, not to Trump. Last time they resisted, slowed his agenda, leaked to the press. became the resistance from within. Trump's response this time? Schedule F, an executive order reclassifying federal employees, making them fireable at will. No civil service protections. Tens of thousands of career officials could be replaced. With loyalists, with ideologues, with people who serve Trump, not the Constitution. This is the nightmare scenario his enemies feared. A federal government staffed not by professionals but by partisans. Expertise replaced by loyalty. Competence replaced by ideology. The regulatory state, EPA,
SEC, FTC,
FDA, every agency that constrains corporate power, that protects consumers, workers, the environment. Trump's team views them as obstacles, impediments to freedom, to growth, to America first. The plan is simple. Deconstruct the administrative state. Gut regulations. Eliminate oversight. Return power to states, to markets, to individuals. It sounds libertarian, but it's really about power. Corporate power, presidential power, power unconstrained by bureaucratic checks. His enemies understand what's happening. A fundamental reshaping of American governance. Not through legislation, through executive action, through administrative rulings, through personnel decisions. The courts might stop him, but Trump's judges dominate the federal judiciary. His Supreme Court is sympathetic to expanded executive power. And even if they rule against him, enforcement takes time. Appeals take years. By then, the damage is done. Mas o que ninguém esperava was how Trump would use his second term to ensure there's never a third term for his enemies. Election reform. Not real reform. Partisan reform. Voting restrictions passed by Republican state legislatures. Upheld by Trump-appointed judges. Making it harder to vote in Democratic areas. Easier in Republican ones. Legal, but barely. Gerrymandering on steroids. State legislatures drawing maps that guarantee Republican control. The Supreme Court has said political gerrymandering is beyond their jurisdiction. So there's no check, no balance, just raw political power. Media control, not government censorship. That would be unconstitutional. But economic pressure, regulatory threats, using federal power to intimidate critical outlets, rewarding friendly ones. It's subtle, deniable, effective. The result? A media landscape where criticism of Trump carries costs, where neutrality seems partisan, where truth becomes contested terrain. This is what terrifies Trump's enemies. Not just what he's doing now, but what he's building for the future. A system where Republicans can lose the popular vote and still control government. Where Democratic victories become increasingly difficult. Where the playing field isn't level anymore. It's not quite authoritarianism. Not quite dictatorship. There are still elections. Still courts. Still a free press. Technically. But the thumb is on the scale. Heavily. And getting heavier. Foreign policy. This is where Trump's lack of constraints becomes most dangerous. No adults in the room to restrain him. No generals to push back. No diplomats to counsel caution. Trump meets with Putin. Without staff. Without note-takers. Nobody knows what they discuss. What deals they make. What promises Trump extends. His enemies worry. But they can't stop it.
Ukraine,
Trump has always been ambiguous about support. Russia's invasion. The war. American aid. I'll end it in 24 hours, Trump promised. His enemies know what that means. Pressure Ukraine to cede territory. Accept Putin's terms. Abandon American commitments. Terrifies them. Not just for Ukraine, but for what it signals. American reliability.
NATO solidarity,
The post-World War II order. Trump sees all of it as negotiable, as transactional, as subject to deals. China. Trump's first term featured a trade war. His second term might feature something worse. Military tension over Taiwan. Economic decoupling. A new Cold War. Trump's unpredictability makes miscalculation more likely. And miscalculation with nuclear powers is catastrophic. His enemies watch nervously. They can't control him, can't predict him, can't trust him, and he's the most powerful person on earth. The Supreme Court, 3 justices in Trump's first term. If any of the remaining conservatives retire during his second term, Trump could have appointed 5 of 9 justices. A 6-3 conservative majority could become 7-2 or even 8-1. For generations, 40 years, maybe 50, long after Trump is gone, his Supreme Court will be shaping American law. Abortion, voting rights, environmental protection, corporate regulation, civil rights, all of it subject to Trump's judicial legacy. This is the long game, the real power, not what Trump does as president, but what his judges do for decades after he's gone. His enemies understand they've lost this battle. Completely, the courts are gone. For their lifetimes, and there's nothing they can do about it.
Essa decisão teria consequências irreversíveis.
But there's one more reason Trump terrifies his enemies. One that nobody wants to say out loud. One that's almost too disturbing to contemplate. What if he doesn't leave in 2029? The Constitution is clear. 2 terms. Maximum. 22nd Amendment. Trump can't run again in 2028. That's the rule. The law. The guardrail. But Trump has never respected guardrails. I'm entitled to a 3rd term, Trump has joked. Maybe joked. With Trump, you never know. They spied on my campaign. Witch hunt. I deserve a do-over. His supporters laugh. Chant for more years at rallies. But some of them aren't joking. Some of them believe Trump should stay as long as necessary. To fix America. To punish his enemies. To complete the mission. His opponents watch with growing dread. Because they know Trump. They know he doesn't willingly give up power. Ever. He's never conceded an election he lost. Why would he accept term limits? The scenarios keep them awake at night. Trump declares a national emergency. Security threat. Economic crisis. Terrorist attack. Suspends elections. Temporarily. Until the crisis passes. Which never does. Or Trump pushes for a constitutional amendment. Repeal the 22nd Amendment. Let presidents serve unlimited terms. Like FDR. It would require supermajorities. State ratification. Almost impossible. Almost. Or Trump simply refuses to leave. Claims the 2028 election was rigged. Fraudulent. Stolen. His supporters believe him. As they always do. Violence erupts. January 6th looks like a rehearsal. These scenarios sound extreme. Alarmist. Paranoid. But Trump's enemies remember being told their warnings about 2020 were extreme. That Trump would never really refuse to concede. That January 6th could never happen. They were wrong then. They don't want to be wrong again. But here's the deepest terror. The one that keeps Democratic strategists awake. The one they whisper about but don't say publicly. What if none of this matters? What if Trump has already won? Not just the election, but the war. The culture war. The battle for America's soul. Because look at what's happened. Trump was supposed to be an aberration. A mistake. A one-time thing. America would come to its senses. Return to normal. Reject Trumpism. Instead, Trumpism became the mainstream. Not just in Republican politics. In American culture. The shamelessness. The tribalism. The rejection of expertise. The embrace of conspiracy. The normalization of lying. Trump didn't create these things. But he legitimized them. Made them acceptable. Showed they could succeed. And now they're everywhere. Democratic politicians are copying Trump's tactics. Using inflammatory rhetoric.
Attacking institutions.
Dismissing inconvenient facts. Because they learned that being reasonable doesn't win. Being outrageous does. The media has been permanently changed. Objectivity is dead. Every outlet is partisan. Every story is spun. Trust in journalism has collapsed. Trump did that. Deliberately. Successfully. Social media is a cesspool of misinformation. Conspiracy theories. Tribal warfare. People living in separate realities. Unable to agree on basic facts. Trump accelerated that fracture. Made it unbridgeable. American institutions are weakened. Faith in government is at historic lows. Trust in courts is declining. Belief in democracy itself is wavering. Trump did that by attacking relentlessly, by showing these institutions are vulnerable. This is Trump's real legacy. Not his policies, not his appointments, but the cultural transformation, the normalization of abnormality, the acceptance of the unacceptable. And his enemies understand they can't reverse it, can't put the genie back in the bottle, can't restore the old norms, because Trump proved the old norms were always optional, always fragile, always dependent on people choosing to respect them. And enough people have stopped choosing that.
Naquele momento, tudo mudou.
Because Trump's enemies realize they're not fighting to defeat Trump. They're fighting to preserve a version of America that might already be gone. A country where truth matters, where character matters, where norms matter, where shame matters. Trump has shown that none of those things matter. Not if you refuse to let them matter. Not if you're shameless enough, strong enough, defiant enough. His enemies throw facts at him. He calls them fake. They present evidence. He dismisses it. They cite experts. He mocks them. They appeal to norms. He laughs, and his supporters cheer, because they don't want facts. They want feeling. They don't want truth. They want validation. They don't want norms. They want revenge. Trump gives them that, and that's why he terrifies his enemies, because they're playing a game with rules, and Trump is playing a game without them. And you can't beat someone playing a different game. His enemies tried everything: investigations, impeachments, indictments, convictions, character attacks, policy critiques, media exposure,
Celebrity endorsements.
grassroots organizing. They spent billions,
Mobilise de millions.
fought for years, and Trump beat them. Again. Not because he's smarter, not because he's more qualified, not because his ideas are better, but because he understood something they didn't. In modern America, shamelessness is power, defiance is strength, and refusing to play by the rules is the ultimate advantage. Trump's enemies still believe in institutions, in processes, in norms, in the system. Trump believes in none of those things. He believes in winning, only winning, by any means necessary. That's an asymmetric battle. And asymmetric battles favor the shameless. So why does Trump still terrify his enemies? Because they realize he's not the disease. He's the symptom, the fever that reveals the infection. America was already sick. Trump just made it visible. The tribalism was always there. Trump weaponized it. The distrust was always there. Trump exploited it. The rage was always there. Trump channeled it. The shamelessness was always there. Trump normalized it. His enemies tried to treat Trump like an aberration, something to be removed, cured, forgotten. But you can't cure a symptom without treating the disease. And the disease is much bigger than Trump. It's a country where half the population lives in one reality and half in another, where facts are partisan, where truth is negotiable, where nothing is shared, not values, not vision, not even basic observable reality. Trump didn't create that divide, but he's the avatar of it, the personification of it. And as long as that divide exists, Trump or someone like him will thrive. That's the ultimate terror. Not Trump himself, but what comes after Trump. Because Trump showed the blueprint, the playbook, the strategy, and the next Trump might be younger, smarter, more disciplined, more dangerous. Trump is 78. He won't be around forever, but Trumpism will. The tactics will. The shamelessness will. The refusal to respect norms will. Trump opened Pandora's box, and nobody knows how to close it. His enemies understand they're not just fighting one man. They're fighting the future, a future where truth is dead, where shame is weakness, where power is the only currency that matters. And they're losing, because in the end, Trump terrifies his enemies not because of what he's done, but because of what he's proven possible. That you can be impeached twice and return to power. that you can incite an insurrection and face no real consequences, that you can be convicted of felonies and still become president. Trump has shown that in America, if you're defiant enough, shameless enough, powerful enough, you can survive anything, do anything, become anything. The guardrails were illusions. The norms were suggestions. The system was fragile, and Trump shattered it. His enemies tried to stop him with facts, with laws, with institutions, with norms. None of it worked, because Trump doesn't respect any of those things, and neither do his supporters. They tried to defeat him at the ballot box, twice, lost both times when it mattered most. They tried to hold him accountable in court. He turned prosecutions into fundraising bonanzas. They tried to exile him from the party. He remade the party in his image. They tried everything, and he's still here, still winning, still terrifying them. Because deep down, Trump's enemies know something they don't want to admit. Something that keeps them awake at night. Something that fills them with existential dread. Trump might be unbeatable, not because he's strong, but because the system that's supposed to stop him is too weak, too dependent on good faith, too reliant on shared values, too fragile to contain someone who simply refuses to be contained. And if Trump is unbeatable, if shamelessness is power, if defiance is strength, if refusing to respect norms is the ultimate advantage, then American democracy as we knew it is already dead. That's why Trump still terrifies his enemies. Not because of what he is, but because of what he represents. The end of an era, the death of a dream, the collapse of a system that only worked because everyone agreed to make it work. Trump stopped agreeing, and the whole thing fell apart, and nobody knows how to put it back together.